Standing in that packed auditorium, watching my 18-year-old son Jason walk across the stage to receive his high school diploma, I felt like my chest might burst with pride. This kid had worked his tail off for 4 years, maintaining a 4.2 GPA while juggling a part-time job at the local grocery store and volunteering at the animal shelter every weekend. In just 3 months, he would be heading to Stanford University, his dream school, with a partial scholarship that covered about 60% of his costs. The rest would come from the college fund Sarah and I had been building since the day he was born. What should have been the perfect celebration was about to become the worst family betrayal I had ever experienced. Before I tell you what happened next, let me know where you are watching from, and hit that like button if you have ever had family drama at the worst possible moment. Trust me, you are going to want to stay for this one, because what my parents did next changed everything. Growing up as the older son, in a middle-class family in suburban Ohio, I learned early that nothing came easy. My father, Harold, worked as a production manager at a local manufacturing plant, putting in 50-hour weeks to keep food on the table. My mother, Margaret, spent her days as a secretary at our neighborhood church, managing schedules and answering phones for a salary that barely covered groceries. Despite their modest income, they always found ways to make my younger sister Linda and me feel like we had everything we needed. But there was always something different about how they treated Linda compared to me. When she struggled in school, they hired tutors and made excuses. When I struggled, they told me to work harder. When Linda wanted dance lessons or new clothes, they somehow found the money. When I wanted to join the baseball team, I had to get a job mowing lawns to pay for my own equipment. I do not say this with bitterness, just as a fact that shaped how I approached my own family later in life. Linda married her high school boyfriend right after graduation and had Tyler when she was barely 19. The marriage lasted about as long as most teenage romances do, which left her back at our parents' house with a toddler and no real plan for the future. Over the years, she bounced between jobs, relationships, and apartments. But whenever things got tough, she knew she could count on Harold and Margaret to bail her out. They paid her rent more times than I can count, bought her cars when hers broke down, and basically raised Tyler while she figured out her life. Meanwhile, Sarah and I met in college, got married after graduation, and started building our life together the hard way. We both worked full-time jobs, saved every penny we could, and when Jason was born, we immediately opened a college savings account. I remember sitting at the kitchen table with a calculator, figuring out that if we put away $300 every month and made some smart investments, we could cover most of his college expenses by the time he turned 18. Those $300 each month meant we drove older cars, lived in a smaller house than we could have afforded otherwise, and took vacations to state parks instead of Disney World. I picked up weekend shifts at the hardware store, and Sarah worked overtime whenever she could get it. Every birthday and Christmas, instead of buying Jason expensive toys, we would deposit half of his gift money into that college fund and explain to him why we were doing it. Jason understood from an early age that education was not something to take for granted. He watched us sacrifice for his future, and it made him work harder in school. By middle school, he was already talking about college like it was a given, not a maybe. He started working as soon as he turned 16, not because we made him, but because he wanted to contribute to his own future. Tyler, on the other hand, had a very different upbringing. Linda moved back in with Harold and Margaret when he was about 10, and they basically became his parents. He had no responsibilities, no consequences for poor grades, and no understanding of what money actually meant. When he wanted something, Grandma and Grandpa bought it. When he got in trouble at school, they made excuses for him. By the time he reached high school, he was pulling C's and D's, while Jason was taking advanced placement classes and earning scholarship offers. The first sign of trouble came about 6 months before Jason's graduation. Margaret started making comments during family dinners about how Tyler was going to need help with college too. She would say things like, "Family should help family," and "It is not fair for one grandchild to have advantages the other does not have." Sarah and I would nod politely, and changed the subject, thinking these were just passing thoughts from a grandmother who loved both her grandsons. But the comments became more frequent and more pointed. Harold started asking detailed questions about Jason's college fund, how much we had saved, and what our plans were for paying Stanford's tuition. When I told him we had it handled, he would get this look on his face, like he was calculating something in his head. Margaret began dropping hints about Tyler applying to some of the same schools as Jason, even though his grades and test scores were nowhere near competitive for those institutions. The week before graduation, Linda called to ask if Tyler could ride with us to the ceremony because her car was in the shop again. It should have been a simple favor, but something about the way she asked felt different. There was an excitement in her voice that did not match the occasion. Tyler was not graduating, Jason was, but she sounded like she was about to receive some kind of good news. Sarah and I spent the morning of graduation day getting ready for what we thought would be one of the happiest moments of our lives. We had reserved a table at Jason's favorite restaurant after the ceremony, hired a photographer to capture the special moments, and even splurged on a small celebration at our house afterward. Jason had invited a few of his closest friends, and we had bought all the ingredients for his favorite chocolate cake. Looking back now, I realized that while we were planning a celebration of Jason's achievements, my parents and sister were planning something entirely different. The graduation ceremony itself was everything we had hoped it would be. Jason looked confident and proud as he walked across that stage, and when they called his name, Sarah grabbed my hand so tight I thought she might break my fingers. Our son had made it. 4 years of hard work, countless late nights studying, and all those weekend shifts I had worked to build his college fund were about to pay off in the biggest way possible. After the ceremony, we all gathered at our house for the celebration. Jason was still wearing his cap and gown, showing off his diploma to anyone who would look at it. He kept talking about Stanford, his planned major in engineering, and how excited he was to start this new chapter of his life. Sarah was in the kitchen, putting finishing touches on his favorite cake, and I was grilling burgers in the backyard, feeling like everything in my world was exactly as it should be. Harold and Margaret arrived about an hour after we got home, and I noticed immediately that they seemed different. They were not sharing in the celebratory mood, the way I expected grandparents would be at their grandson's graduation party. Instead, they kept exchanging meaningful looks and checking their phones like they were waiting for something important to happen. Linda showed up with Tyler about 30 minutes later, and they both had this weird energy about them. Linda seemed nervous but excited, like someone who knew a secret she was dying to share. Tyler, who was normally pretty quiet at family gatherings, was almost bouncing with anticipation. At 16, he still had 2 years of high school left, but he was acting like this party was somehow about him too. We were all sitting around the living room eating cake and listening to Jason talk about his plans for freshman year when Harold suddenly stood up and cleared his throat like he was about to make some kind of official announcement. The room got quiet, and everyone turned to look at him. Sarah and I exchanged a quick glance, wondering what this could possibly be about. "We have been doing a lot of thinking lately," Harold began, his voice taking on that authoritative tone he used when he was about to lay down the law about something. "And your mother and I have made a decision about Jason's college fund." My stomach dropped. Sarah went completely still beside me. Jason looked confused, probably wondering why his grandparents were talking about his college money at his graduation party. "We have decided," Margaret chimed in, standing up next to her husband, "that the money should go to Tyler instead." The words hit the room like a physical blow. Jason's face went white. Sarah made a small, gasping sound. I felt like someone had just punched me in the gut. "Tyler needs the help more than Jason does." Harold continued, as if he was explaining something perfectly reasonable. "Jason already has a partial scholarship to Stanford. Tyler is going to need every bit of assistance he can get to make it through college." Margaret nodded, along with her husband's reasoning. "Tyler is Linda's boy, our baby girl's son. He deserves the same opportunities that Jason has had." I found my voice, though it came out shakier than I intended. That money was saved specifically for Jason's education. Sarah and I have been putting away $300 a month for 18 years. And we appreciate all the hard work you have done, Linda said, speaking up for the first time since the announcement. But Tyler is family too. Jason is smart and capable. He will figure out how to pay for the rest of his education. Tyler needs more support. Tyler, meanwhile, was already acting like the money belonged to him. He started talking about which colleges he might apply to, how he was thinking about buying a new car for campus and maybe taking some easier classes at the community college to start with, since he would not have to worry about scholarship requirements. I looked at Jason and saw my son's entire world crashing down around him. All those years of watching us sacrifice for his education, all those hours he had spent studying and working part-time jobs to contribute to his own future. And now his grandparents were casually giving away his college fund like it was theirs to distribute. This is insane, I said, my voice getting louder. That money was never yours to give away. We saved it for Jason. Actually, Margaret said, with a satisfied smile, we contacted the bank yesterday. We are going to have the funds transferred to an account for Tyler next week. We have already spoken to someone there who can help us make sure Tyler gets what he needs for his education. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. Harold and Margaret were talking about my son's future, like it was a business transaction they could just decide to modify. Linda was nodding along like this was the most natural thing in the world. And Tyler was already spending money that had never belonged to him in the first place. But the worst part was watching Jason, my 18-year-old son, who had worked so hard for this moment, was sitting there trying not to cry as his grandparents casually dismantled his dreams. He kept looking at me like he was waiting for me to fix this, to make it right, to protect the future we had all worked so hard to build for him. Tyler deserves a chance too, Margaret said, her voice taking on that guilt-inducing tone she had perfected over the years. It is not fair for one grandchild to have every advantage while the other struggles. Jason has advantages because he earned them, Sarah said quietly, but there was steel in her voice. He maintained a 4.2 GPA, worked part-time, volunteered in his community, and earned scholarship offers. Those are not advantages. Those are the results of hard work. Harold waved Sarah's comment away like it was irrelevant. Tyler just needs a different kind of support. Not every kid is cut out for the same path. We think this is the fair thing to do. I could feel my control slipping away. These were my parents' people who were supposed to support their grandchildren, not pit them against each other. But they were sitting in my living room at my son's graduation party, announcing that they were stealing his future to give it to his cousin. You cannot just decide to take Jason's college fund, I said, standing up to face them. That money was saved specifically for his education over 18 years. We are not taking anything, Harold replied coldly. We are redistributing family resources to where they are needed most. Tyler has not had the same advantages that Jason has enjoyed. What advantages? I shot back. The advantage of having parents who worked overtime to save for his education. The advantage of being taught that grades and effort matter. The advantage of learning that success comes from hard work, not handouts. Margaret's face hardened. Do not take that tone with us, Reed. After everything your father and I have done for this family, the least you could do is show some gratitude and consideration for your sister's son. Gratitude? I was incredulous. You want me to be grateful that you are destroying my son's future? Linda jumped into the argument, her voice rising defensively. Tyler is family too. He deserves the same opportunities. Jason is smart enough to figure out other ways to pay for college. Tyler needs more help. Tyler needs to learn how to help himself, Sarah said firmly. Giving him Jason's college fund is not going to teach him anything except that he can expect other people to solve his problems. That is easy for you to say, Linda snapped back. Your precious Jason has had every advantage handed to him on a silver platter. Handed to him, I could not believe what I was hearing. Jason worked for everything he has achieved. He has been working part-time jobs since he was 16. He volunteers 20 hours a month at the animal shelter. He earned his scholarship through academic excellence, not because someone gave it to him. Harold stood up, his face red with anger. This conversation is over. We have made our decision. The bank transfer will happen next week, and Tyler will have access to the funds for his education. That is when Jason finally broke. My 18-year-old son, who had been trying so hard to hold it together during this insane conversation, suddenly stood up with tears streaming down his face and ran upstairs to his room. The sound of his bedroom door slamming echoed through the house like a gunshot. I followed him upstairs and found him sitting on his bed, still wearing his graduation cap, sobbing into his hands. "Dad," he said. When he saw me, his voice broken and defeated. "I guess I am not going to Stanford after all." Those words shattered something inside me. This was my son, who had worked so hard and dreamed so big, accepting that his future was being stolen from him by his own family. I sat down next to him and put my arm around his shoulders, but I could not find any words that would make this better. Sarah appeared in the doorway, and I could see that she had been crying too. But there was something else in her expression, something that looked almost like relief. She came over and sat on Jason's other side, then looked at me with a small smile that seemed completely out of place given what was happening. "Reed," she said quietly, "I need to tell you something." I looked at her, confused by the sudden change in her demeanor. "Remember 3 weeks ago when I said I had a weird feeling about your parents asking so many questions about the college fund?" I nodded. Sarah had mentioned that she thought Harold and Margaret were acting strange, but I had dismissed her concerns as overthinking. "I convinced you to transfer the money to that new account at First National Bank, remember? I said it was just to be safe, to make sure we had better control over Jason's college fund," I remembered. Sarah had been insistent that we move the money, and even though it seemed like an unnecessary hassle, I had agreed because she seemed so worried about it. Well, Sarah continued, "It turns out my instincts were right. Your parents never had access to that fund, and they definitely do not have access to it now." Jason looked up, his tears stopping as he processed what his mother was saying. "You mean they cannot actually take my college money?" "They never could," Sarah explained. "The original account was in our names only. But when I heard them asking all those detailed questions, I realized they might be planning something exactly like this. So we moved everything to a completely different bank where they have no connections and no way to interfere." I felt a surge of gratitude toward my wife that was so strong it almost knocked me over. While I had been dismissing her concerns as paranoia, she had been protecting our family from exactly this kind of betrayal. "So, what do we do now?" Jason asked, hope creeping back into his voice. I looked at my son, then at my wife, and felt something shift inside me. For my entire adult life, I had been trying to keep peace with my parents, accepting their criticism and manipulation because they were family. But they had just tried to destroy my son's future, and they were downstairs right now, celebrating what they thought was their successful theft of 18 years of our sacrifice. "Now, we go downstairs and end this," I said. When we walked back into the living room, Harold was on his phone with someone, probably his banker friend, arranging what he thought would be the transfer of Jason's college fund. Margaret was sitting with Linda and Tyler, already making plans for Tyler's college journey, with money that was never theirs to give. "I talked to Bob at the bank," Harold announced as he hung up his phone. "He says they can expedite the transfer process. Tyler should have access to the funds by early next week." Tyler was grinning like he had just won the lottery. Linda was practically glowing with satisfaction. Margaret was nodding approvingly at her husband's efficiency in stealing from their own grandson. That is when Sarah laughed. It was not a bitter laugh or an angry laugh. It was the kind of laugh you make when someone tells you a joke that is so absurd you cannot help but be amused by it. "That is funny," she said, her voice completely calm and pleasant, "because we moved that money last month." The room went completely silent. Harold looked confused. Margaret's satisfied expression faltered. Linda and Tyler both stopped talking mid-sentence. "What do you mean, moved it?" Harold asked slowly. I mean, we transferred Jason's college fund to a different bank 3 weeks ago, Sarah explained, with the same calm tone you might use to discuss the weather. You have no access to it. Bob at your bank has no access to it, and there is no way for you to touch a single penny of the money we saved for our son's education. I watched my parents' faces as the reality of the situation sank in. Harold went pale, then red, then pale again. Margaret's mouth opened and closed several times without any sound coming out. That is theft. Harold finally exploded, jumping up from his chair. That money belongs to this family.